in my world with economic development, almost every business that reaches out to us now, their biggest struggle is to find people to fill open positions. And I think right now we're in this difficult point where we've got a lot of new residents in the community, but they have maintained their connection to work of some sort from wherever they were before they were here. And over the next couple of years, maybe it takes longer than a couple of years, the hope is that they will find their place in the local workforce.
Hi folks, this is Gary Schweikauskas of Hudson Valley One, Ulster Publishing Company, and we're here for our weekly podcast. And we're starting to do different ones now where I'm going to talk to people, interview them, and chat about things that are important to all of us. We have a sensational visitor. We have Tim Weidemann, who's the head of economic development in Ulster County, and whom Pat Ryan referred to as the quarterback of our team in this IBM deal. And I was freezing my butt off like everybody else yesterday morning.
It was a cold day to be outside for a press conference, yeah.
And so that kept it to a merciful size. But there were about 60, 70 people there.
Yeah, probably about that, yeah.
And we met the developers. Yeah. And the developers seem as folksy as Warren Buffett seems. Yeah.
Real people,
accessible. They weren't suits, put it that way.
Definitely not. Yeah.
And they, for them, this was an adventure and something, when you take on a project of redevelopment, there are always hidden problems, and there's kind of, it's challenging in an extra dimension. Yeah. And they took it on, and they seem happy about that. And hell, anybody who's willing to put in $200 million and spend 10 years on making something work has my vote.
Yeah, they're pretty exceptional, and I think that's why we're so excited to have them here in Kingston talking about what they're calling iPark 87. So National Resources is the firm, and so if you Google them, you'll find their track record. They've been doing this work for 30 years. Downstate, more recently in East Fishkill. So they are experienced not just in the kind of work of repurposing old industrial sites, but specifically former IBM sites, which is interesting, and I think will give them a head start on the work here in Kingston. These old IBM campuses have their own special circumstances. So I think it's exciting to have partners like that. And you called them developers, and I feel like we've gotten used to that term almost being a bad name. And so, I think we have to get used to the fact that not all developers are, short-minded, small-minded, thinking about just profit. I think Joe Cotter, Lynn Ward, the two kind of principals at National Resources, as they talked about, are really about trying to give birth back to these sites, bring these sites back to life that have been abandoned and underutilized for so long, and they've done it successfully elsewhere. They see it as an adventure. I think that's a good way to describe it. Yeah. And so we're good.
They are, of course, concerned with the rate of return.
Yeah.
But they look at it in the long term.
In the long run, yeah.
And that's what we want for this particular site. So again, they talk about a substantial investment. There are still environmental problems. Yep. There are no tenants, basically.
Although they did, it was exciting that they announced their first intent for tenancy from Ronnie Brook Farms. So that's an exciting step.
Oh, is that Ronnie Brook?
Yep, Ronnie Brook.
Not somebody else?
No, that's Ronnie Brook.
Okay.
So they've been in Fishkill, and they're expanding, and there isn't room for their expansion down there. So, I think it was a little bit of a premature announcement, but not in the sense that they definitely have commitments from Ronnie Brook. So I think we'll see that materialize in the coming months as they get control of the site. I should just maybe quickly point out that we're in this process right now of transitioning the site to their ownership and control. And so the press conference was a chance to introduce them all. We're going to have a public hearing on December 21st at 6:30. The legislature is. And so we'll be looking for people's comments, questions, feedback between now and then and at that public hearing. So.
What's your favorite Ronnie Brook product?
I like them all. I feel like the eggnog this time of year is like to die for.
So, all right.
Yeah. I think it's their ice cream operation that is looking to expand. So we may have Ronnie Brook ice cream up in the town of Ulster. So
to be truthful about it, my wife loves eggnog, and she gets hers at Stewart. She says they have a very good
Stewart's eggnog is great too.
So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to Ronnie Brook
We'll have a
Stewart's.
competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Well, I think that Joe Cotter mentioned that there were a dozen food-related.
Yeah. So again, I think part of what made it clear that there's a kind of philosophical fit here is the work that they're doing, even down in Fishkill at iPark 84. It's really driven by a lot of mix of tenants that really represent some of the sectors that, as you know, we've talked about before. The Ulster 2040 report that we did about a year ago identified priority sectors for us to focus our work in economic development in Ulster County, and ag, food, and beverage is a big one. Down in Fishkill, they've got Sloop Brewing as one of their signature tenants that's grown and expanded 3 or 4 times since they moved in there. They've got Jane Bakes, which is a cookie company. They've got, I can't pronounce the Italian words, Figloni pasta, a pasta maker down there. So I think some of what has happened naturally down there, they expect will also happen naturally up here. And I think they described it that way, that their work to revitalize these campuses is really not based on some, distinct or really fully fleshed out master vision that they come at the beginning with, that it really reflects the things that are happening in a community, and they try to enable that, and form that as it takes place.
I'm hopeful that they can get a couple of anchor tenants which make a difference, because frankly, one of the differences between iPark 84 and iPark 87 is that the town of Ulster is surrounded by strip mall and regular malls and all kinds of stuff. And it's a little bit different than when you have a couple of huge microchip companies as anchors.
It is, and I think that'll result in a different flavor, no doubt. It'll look different, feel different than iPark 84. And I think their challenge, as they pointed out, most of the time when they undertake these projects, there is an anchor tenant or more than one anchor tenant already in place. Here, that's not true. This campus has really diminished, as we all know, to the point where there are a few small tenants hanging on, but ultimately there's no tenancy left. The presence of the town of Ulster in the commercial district there has been of great interest. You remember perhaps that we did, maybe not to overcomplicate things, we did an RFEI, request for interest, expressions of interest, on the west side of the campus about a year ago, and had a really interesting submission from some of the local folks in film and television that really talked about the presence next to all of that commercial stuff and the hotels that are in town of Ulster as kind of the perfect natural backlot for film and television production there. And National Resources has a signature project down in Yonkers, iPark Hudson. Lionsgate is the big anchor tenant there.
And apparently they're going to apply for an expansion.
Exactly. So I think whether, we have our own great partners in Upriver Studios and Stockade Works that have been in conversations with National Resources about future options for tenancy there. But one way or the other, it seems likely that film television production will have some presence on the campus, and I think it's well suited for that. So it would be interesting to see that.
Yeah. Again, you need, fortunately, or you have the right kind of space that could be converted to that. Unfortunately, the initial stages don't necessarily generate a lot of employment. It's just they form a sort of a mini anchor around which the various production companies and groups. Right. And we certainly have enough well-known actors around here.
Totally right.
Directors.
Well, and I think the interesting thing there is that the film and television industry requires as support so many other industries and employers. So, in fact, as Stockade Works and Upriver Studios have been looking at the campus, and we've been talking with them in kind of broad strokes about the west side of the campus, their plans and vision are for some soundstage space, but an equal amount of back office mill space. So that's where set production happens. That's where makeup and post-production happens. And so, there's a whole ecosystem there of employment that isn't necessarily the actual television show itself, but all the support.
Do you know how they're doing at the old KTB up in Saugerties, where they have that?
Yeah, that's Upriver Studios. Yep. Yeah. Yep. And so there's a little more than 100,000 square feet of soundstage, and that's all fully leased up by HBO for the Pretty Little Liars production that they're working on, potentially for up to 3 years, I guess. And what they found is that all the space is filled with production. That leaves all of the support work desperately looking for more space, because they can't be in there while they're filming, so they've got to have extra space.
I think that's one of the potential advantages of this place. I noticed that nobody yesterday mentioned very much about people coming from New York, and not just the companies they own, which I think maybe not be numerous, but the skills and experience and connections
Totally.
they all have.
Totally.
So
we've talked about that. Yeah, and that's huge. I mean, it maybe takes time for that to sink in the community. Like, when people come, they maintain their connections back where they came from for a little bit until they settle in. But that's happening now.
They also express a wish that they had something like that here.
Yeah, that's right.
And they start reaching out. And I've met various people who bought houses in Kingston and Woodstock, and they talk about, they want to go down to New York once a month.
Yeah.
And they found a couple of people with skills, and they're very happy.
Yeah.
That's the way it works.
Yeah, it is the way it works. And I think it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years as people kind of settle in the community, and this is not a new thing. Obviously, waves of this have been happening for as long as Kingston has existed. But but I think the interesting opportunities that it presents in what increasingly, I think, in my world with economic development, almost every business that reaches out to us now, their biggest struggle is to find people to fill open positions. And I think right now we're in this difficult point where we've got a lot of new residents in the community. But they have maintained their connection to work of some sort from wherever they were before they were here. And over the next couple of years, maybe it takes longer than a couple of years, the hope is that they will find their place in the local workforce and help to fill some of those positions.
You talked about the waves, and I think we're into a wave now, which is different in character because I read a really thorough study which said that before the pandemic, 5% of people work from home on average, and now they sample tens of thousands of people. 20%. Wow, and that's a huge difference.
Shift.
So that makes this wave different.
Yeah.
Now I came. You'd be surprised to know I came as a hippie in the '60s, and that was my wave.
Yeah.
And a lot of natural foods and yoga and drugs.
Yeah.
What wave did you come in?
I came in the wave of the 90s. So soon impulse, and fell in love with the area, and then decided to stay. In Kingston, at the time, I couldn't afford an apartment once I didn't have student loans to help me pay my rent. So I ended up in Kingston. And I feel like many of us have come from other places. And I think it's out of a love for this place, which can, maybe to a little bit of a shift of topic, but it can be one of the challenges too, is that like when you love a place too much the way it is, change becomes harder. And I think we all have to recognize, whether we've been here 20 years or whole lives or 2 years or 2 months, that this place is dynamic. It's constantly changing, and trying to understand that change and ultimately recognize that
I think that nature's wonderful around here.
Yeah.
Community is building, but the economy sucks.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I think that's mostly true. I guess we should all be asking the question, why? Why is it that we have all these other resources, these other assets, and yet our economy is perceived, at least, to suck? And I think sometimes with the waves of in-migration, and especially as you pointed out, with more and more people being able to work remotely, that is a challenge for a region's economy. That that we've got residents who contribute to their community in lots of ways, but are not actually participating in the local workforce. And especially in a time when we have shortages in available labor for our employers, that's a tough dynamic. There are people here, but they're not necessarily participating in the local workforce. And so for our local employers, that's a real challenge.
Well, you'd think that, this, of course, that's a nationwide phenomenon.
True.
People quitting their jobs.
Yep.
The percentage of people employed not going up to, there's still a few percentage points difference. But that's partly, you have that choice sometimes around here.
Yeah, that's right.
People who are kind of not particularly enamored of being part of the system. Especially young people. Say, I don't want any part of it until it changes, and it ain't going to change unless they participate.
Well, that's the thing I would say to that. But I also think that's been true who probably around here, again, these are all waves, and they're not, I don't think there's a whole lot that's new about it. Maybe around the margins there's some new parts of it, but I think that it's part of what makes this place great. So, and to say that the economy sucks, I think, with my perception of it is that what we have is a thin labor market. So if you're looking for work here, there just are not a ton of options in most occupations. You've got one or two employers,
Yep.
and if you want to shift, the labor market is thin, and so you have a hard time finding another option. And many people around here end up, as a result, with second jobs or even third jobs to try to kind of pull together things to make ends meet.
Yep.
And this was back to our Ulster 2040 report that as costs increase and wages kind of stay stagnant, that's the condition that leads people to leave our area. And so this is, on the kind of big demographic cycles, this is what seems to have taken place is we have in-migration, we have, some settling out that happens, whether that's people who in-migrate choosing to leave again, or whether it's, increasing costs, pushing out then people who can't afford to live here.
Well, as you know, employers have been increasing wages.
Yeah.
The problem is that rents have gone up faster than wages.
Right,
even.
and we're seeing that. All costs,
that's a
rents
problem,
especially,
yeah.
but all costs. And and that is a problem. And I think, how do we, that is in many cases, that's, global or at least national forces at work in the cost of goods and in, the demand for housing and quite frankly, a limited supply of housing that drives up cost. So these are big, tough issues. And I think when we say that our economy isn't working, I think we have to not just look at the kind of surface issues, but we have to look deeper at these issues. And housing is a big one. Like we have not built enough of it in the last 50 years.
Pat Ryan, your boss,
Yep.
Has talked, I think, quite correctly about 4 or 5 areas
Yep.
that housing, environment,
Yep.
Et cetera.
Yep.
And quite correctly, what I would like to see is some kind of a quantification of goals.
Right.
So if you talk about housing, well, how many units do you need of affordable housing?
Right.
And how many do you commit to trying to produce every year?
Yeah. Well, I hear you, and I'm all about quantifying goals and measuring. But I think we had a housing action plan that came out sometime earlier this year that was at least a step in that direction.
Yep.
To really quantify the demand, the need for housing, the available units, and to really point to the huge gap there. And ultimately, the county is not a housing developer, so we don't go out and build housing. Maybe we should at some point, but right now that's not our purview. And we don't also, one of the big factors in building housing is land use policy, and the county doesn't control local land use policy. So that report, I think, does a good job of threading the needle to talk about really this is our chance to, to kind of step up the attention to this issue, to kind of impress upon people the more imperative of making sure that residents here can afford to live here.
Okay.
But we ultimately have to look to partners like, RUPCO does amazing work, Family of Woodstock, and quite frankly, we need to look more and more to the private sector to fill this gap.
I think, RUPCO and Family are 2 wonderful organizations as far as I know. 2 or 3 sentences ago, you talked about the housing needs of different kinds of people. Yeah. And I very much admired what you did in terms of the housing the homeless in the Quality Inn on Route 28. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how that came about, and it seems that would take care of about 1/3 of the county's total homeless population, but that's whole county. A big contribution in Kingston.
Yeah, well, this is a project that's been spearheaded out of the executive's office. I'm not intimately involved, but I think I can just say that, the recognition here is that we need to find ways to transition quickly to provide housing, especially to those that are most vulnerable in our community. They can't wait, ultimately. If they're pushed out of an apartment for whatever reason, they end up on the streets homeless or leaving the area and struggling to find housing elsewhere. And, at the same time, I think we recognize that it takes sometimes 10 years to build new housing. And so I think the strategy that's kind of, embodied in the Quality Inn project is where do we have underutilized hotel spaces, motels that could be repurposed quickly for housing for those that are most in need.
Yeah, what I admire I guess, two things. One is the deal that made Jim Quigley welcome this facility,
right.
that is the sewer and water across the thruway.
Yep.
And the second part is the provision of services. That is that the professionals will come to that facility, and I think that's a good model, so that is the mountain coming to Muhammad.
Yeah. I mean, it's essential. I mean, I think, and this is a reminder that housing is a many-faceted thing. There are different needs for different people, and we have to be paying attention to, at all levels, what are the housing need. And I think clearly, folks that have mental health issues or substance abuse issues, or otherwise in a kind of precarious state, need supportive housing. And I think it's good to see. I drove by the Landmark Place project recently, so it's good to see that come into fruition. That should be done soon. And then to see Quality Inn on the kind of on the next rung moving forward. Hopefully there'll be more in the future too.
Yeah, I hope so, and I hope that model, as I said, would be repeated in other communities, so we can, I know Kingston isn't the only place that people are homeless.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, the third and final area,
chapter,
which I warned you about. Was I'm very unhappy about the IDA deal going on. That is, I read that September 8 letter that said that the IDA should be more aligned to the county, that the UTEP should be adjusted to meet the county's goals for 2040. But I was not satisfied with the news that because the IDA didn't sign it, the county executive not only threatened but rejected the Kia application. And I have no love for the Kia application particularly. I thought there was certainly good reason to turn it down, but I think kind of mixing those two things, the participation in your version of what the IDA they wanted, and the conjunction of those two things, I guess that deal was kind of beyond the normal range of political negotiation.
Yeah. Well, let me just say that I don't want to respond directly to the letter, other than just say that a letter is one person's perspective on the matter. And
that's why I wanted your perspective.
Well, I think on the highest level, I would say that, look, collaboration is a two-way street. And so I think, without getting into depth about the Kia project, pros or cons, it is a unique exception to the standard model for how tax exemptions and tax abatements are given, in that it represents a retail project. In New York state law, retail projects, if they're approved, require the sign-off of the executive, the chief elected official of the county. And so I think, it's an example where a project that requires collaboration ultimately between the IDA board and the county executive is an opportunity for us to collaborate. And quite frankly, if there isn't collaboration, it's not surprising that at the end people are at different sides of the table. And so I think, the request that I think has been out there, and I think is well received generally by the IDA, is that we all do need to work together. This is,
I think the IDA is very, I know all the members. So they're dying to work with you. They want to be asked to do something. They want to be asked to contribute money for various kinds of things. And I think, for instance, the paragraph about the Schrade and IBM places, so that's a perfect place. We want $50,000 to study this or that. We are looking around and we feel that you really should, your role would help a lot. And they would jump for it. But I think threatening them is not a good idea.
Well, again, I take issue with that characterization. I don't think anything here is a matter of threats. It's a matter of saying
quid pro quo.
I don't think it's that either. I think it's saying that, look, that if there's a project that requires us to work together, we have to work together. And if we arrive at a conclusion to that project and have not worked together, then we shouldn't be surprised when people have different opinions on what the outcome should be. And there's, I think, a genuine willingness on our side too, on the executive's part, to accept that sometimes mistakes are made, and that especially when there's projects that represent kind of a new model, which the Romeo Kia project did, that sometimes it's not clear up front what the right process is that should get to the outcome. And so I think there's been a lot of patience to say, look, we may have ended up where we are at the end of this thing by mistake or out of just a lack of experience with this particular kind of project. That's fine. If that's the case, water under the bridge. Let's just commit to working together in the future so that we don't end up in the same place again.
When have you or someone from your office last attended an IDA meeting?
I've been to the last 2 IDA meetings, and I have a bi-weekly standing call with their CEO, Rose. We work really well together.
Now, Rose is a straight shooter.
Yep.
And I think that when Rose says something, it's pretty close to the truth.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah, and I think this is. I'll just maybe step back for a second to recognize that IDAs are both very powerful tools, and with great power comes great responsibility. They're tools that I think rightfully so people look at with some skepticism and some concern about how they're used. And so I think all of us, and I think this is shared on both the executive side and with the IDA board, want to be responsible with that tool. And so I think that means that everybody's trying very hard to do the right thing when it comes to how to apply that tool and how to do it surgically for the things that it's absolutely needed for. And I think that our take, at least I can speak for myself and for our approach to the way to engage with the IDA is to support them in using that tool when it's responsible, and then to, quite frankly, ask questions and challenge it when it feels like it's maybe not.
Yeah, and I think they're saying, look at your record. Have you approved many things that require a deviation?
Right.
And isn't it time to look at revising your UTEP? That's all fine.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that the recent change, or in the last few years, the increasing involvement of the state government in terms of its
oversight
rules and oversight, and they ain't encouraging any more IDAs.
Yeah, that's right.
They sent someone who resides in Kingston and works for Orange County to jail. Made him pay $1 million,
but barely.
Barely. So that kind of probably is a sufficient warning signal. That's they mean business.
Yeah, that's right. They do, and rightfully so. Again, it's important that we use that tool for only the things that it's necessary to use it for. And I think, as you alluded to, we've got a project down in Ellenville at the former Schrade site that would represent, 2 decades of deteriorating site being brought back to life again, sort of like the IBM site. There's potentially 350 to 400 jobs immediately at that project. And then at TechCity, commitments from National Resources over the next 5 to 10 years to get to at least 1,000 jobs. These are the kinds of projects that and even just the jobs number doesn't warrant tax incentives. It's a matter of then what is the merits of the project, and do the merits of the project and the need of the project require that? And I think we have to use that tool sparingly so that when we do use it, residents, the public, who ultimately are the taxpayers that we're accountable to, believe that it's the right time to use that tool.
Well, sparingly is a good word to use, and I think that could apply to the relationship between the IDA and the county as well. If you use your power sparingly, you're more likely to succeed than if you use the more familiar method of threatening them.
Yeah, I take issue with that word. I think you know me well enough to know that I don't have a threatening bone in my body, and I don't think there's any intent there for threats. It's just a matter of trying to understand each other's roles, especially when it comes to the nitty-gritty of projects. And again, not speaking to the merits of the Romeo Kia project, but just to the technicality of the fact that in Ulster County we haven't had a pilot for a fully retail establishment. And I think when we approach something new like that, we have to spend particular attention on it.
Why didn't you reject them instead of offering? If Jim Malcolm signed that, you'd approve the Kia project.
So first of all, that's a question you have to ask the executive. It's ultimately his decision, and it's stated that way.
Ask the executive.
It's stated that way in state law, and so I think that the recognition there that in a retail pilot, the chief elected official must sign off on the agreement, in my mind, would lead to an obvious conclusion that this should be something that's discussed in advance and is coordinated between the two bodies in that case that have to approve this thing.
Yeah. I would have rejected it, because I think they're happier where they are across
Sure.
from Adams Fairacre. They're going to do very well with the other car dealers, all of which are in, and that's Ulster Strip now. Yeah. And that particular site of the Kia, it has a separate landlord,
Right.
That's a huge site and
Yeah.
it could be very important. That one and the one where next to Dysing's are two very large, useful sites.
Useful sites. Yeah. No, agreed. And I think we'll have walked through that process, and the outcome being what it is now it's in the past, and hopefully the process that got us there, we can clean it up. And if there's another time where we come to a situation where there's either a retail exemption required, or there's any other instance where the exec and the IDA board have to work together, I think despite the bumpiness of the letter and all that stuff, really quite frankly, we've been in good communication with the IDA, and ultimately I think see the same priorities, the same goals. So
good, folks, you've seen why Tim is referred to as the quarterback of the Ulster County Economic Development Team. And they pulled off a great success yesterday, which will require 10 more years of effort, but it's a success nonetheless.
They all do,
because
right?
10 years is shorter than forever. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Thanks, Kenny.